All righty, we are live. Hi, everyone. It's Diana Gomez, Advocacy Manager at Progress, Texas, and I'm covering today for Sopvik while he raises a whole baby girl during his paternity leave. I'm joined by our Communications Manager, Leslie Story, our Executive Director, Ed Espinoza, and House District 45 Representative, Erin Zwiener. Today, we're talking with Texas Democratic legislators live from Washington, D.C. about their latest efforts to stop voter suppression, amongst many other bad bills in the Texas legislature. So we like to start with an icebreaker for all of our live segments. And when I think of fighting for freedom, for liberty, and what's happening across the nation right now, I'm thinking of two things. One is obviously our Texas Democrat champions who have gone to DC, and also Britney Spears, who is also fighting for her freedom. So we've got a good freedom theme going on. As many of you seen, Britney Spears is back in the news as she continues to fight for her 13-year-long conservatorship to end. And I believe she's just been granted the ability to get her own attorney. Good news, one more step closer to free Britney. So the icebreaker question is, what is your favorite Britney song and why? I will start off. Hopefully I didn't take anyone's obvious answer to this and say that my favorite song is Toxic right now, especially when I think about Greg Abbott, when I think about all the GOP Republicans. Toxic is the one that comes to mind. So I'll start off with Wesley. What's your favorite Britney song?
All right, so don't think I'm basic, but I'm going to say Lucky. I know it's one of like the oldies, but it gets me in my feels. And if you listen to the song, I feel like it's actually very prophetic because considering everything she's going through right now, it actually really fits her story. So that's my favorite song of hers.
Oh, that's such a good one. Ed, what's your favorite Britney song?
I actually do have a favorite Britney song. I listen to more than I care to admit. I still like Baby One More Time, one of the originals, and it's probably one of the most remade songs out there. There was a band in the late 90s called Fountains of Wayne, and they covered Baby One More Time. And then recently, like just last year, there's a band I listened to out of LA called The Marias, and they covered Baby One More Time. So that song will pop up when you least expect it, and you're better off for it.
Awesome. I am also a fan of the Marias, so good to know. Such a classic hit. Erin, I apologize. I'm sure you get asked these same questions over and over again in these interviews. So I'm sure you know the answer to this, and you said it so many times. What is your favorite Britney song?
This is a new question for me. I'm going to congratulations on the originality. And I have to say, Deanna, you did take my favorite Britney song. It is Toxic, which I do think is, just the arrangement is beautiful. It is, I think, the best composed Britney song. I think the video is fantastic. Like the outfit changes, like the sparkly bodysuit. But I do think it does have a nice resonance for the current moment. But I think more Britney songs could have a resonance for the current moment. And I think we should explore that. Baby One More Time. I think we should have Break That Quorum one more time.
Yeah.
I think Oops, We Walked Out Again.
Amazing.
And it's a chance to really bring this quorum break and the fight to defend the freedom to vote and bring them together with Britney.
Oh, love it. See, it makes sense. It makes sense. And so you mentioned the video for Toxic, and a big portion of it takes place on a plane, which y'all used to fly out. That was part two of the quorum break, the walk out at first, and now it's a fly out. So would you mind letting us know why y'all decided to fly out this time? Not specifically the decision to go on a plane instead of walking out, but why did you decide that a quorum break was necessary?
Yeah, of course. First, I'd like to say that what I was just pouring is milk for my daughter. It is not Miller Lite, contrary to any. And I also would like to say that the plane we flew out on looked absolutely nothing like the plane on Toxic. And I don't want to be like hard on the owners of the plane, but it was a little bit like, slightly run down Southwest. So standard.
I think we call that spirits.
Yeah, I don't know if I've flown on Spirit, but for me, it actually reminded me from my Montana days of like the little Alaska planes that would sort of hop from the smaller airports. Yeah. So we chose to go because it was our best option to defend the freedom to vote for Texans. And it wasn't a choice any of us took lightly. We all made various sorts of sacrifices. Mine was splitting up my family and choosing to bring my daughter with me. I will say keeping a just barely 3-year-old in a hotel room in D.C. When you're way too busy to take her to a park or a monument or any of that is not an ideal scenario, but we're making it work. She's being a complete champ. And already has a favorite senator, Senator Gillibrand, mostly because of her dog Maple. But we're here. We all took these personal sacrifices, whether it was splitting up our family or struggling to pay our bills, not being home to be able to do the work that puts food on the table, or whether it was having to make alternate care arrangements for elderly relatives. All of those sacrifices, we made them because we have a duty to the people of Texas. And our duty to protect democracy at all cost. We are coming out of this horrendous regular legislative session where we saw bill after bill be passed that wasn't even supported by the majority of Republicans. And I think we all intellectually knew that the Republican Party was more and more and more being taken hostage by this very extreme corner of the far right. And we saw that in action this session. We saw them pass legislation to remove the last safety precautions for firearms, something that only 21% of Texas voters supported. We saw them effectively ban abortion. I want to note before anybody panics, we're going to have success in court, but they did try to ban all abortion in Texas with no exception for rape or incest, no exception for severe fetal abnormalities, which is just cruel. And that, again, without those exceptions, that is not supported by a majority of Republicans either. We saw the Republicans get together and jointly jump off the Allen West cliff together. And the reason that ties into voting rights is because this attempt to suppress the voice of the people is so that they don't have to be accountable for that. It's so that they can try to make minority rule in Texas permanent and not have to answer to the voters for doing the exact opposite of what every Republican in a competitive seat promised during the 2020 election.
And it kind of goes back to this whole idea that, like, Republicans haven't been listening, but they don't listen to the people who show up and testify. They aren't negotiating with y'all. And so they're so upset that you're not there. They treated you as if you weren't there to begin with, as if any of the people who showed up to the legislature weren't there to begin with.
Yeah, every single time Democrats would speak up and say, this is a line too far, this is a line too far during regular sessions or during the regular session, the answer we got back was, well, it could be worse.
Yeah,
do you want to complain more and make it worse? And there's only so long people will put up with those kind of threats. Mm-hmm. And we reached the point where we were done. And you don't negotiate with a bully. You take their power away from them. And that's what we are doing by being here in DC. We have removed Republicans' power to make lives worse for everyday Texans by being here in DC. We have refused to be hostages.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand. You mentioned that y'all had no other option. You literally had no other option. They were not willing to negotiate, and hundreds of Texans showed up this past weekend to testify against the bill. And even in trying to testify, they put up barriers. They waited until 1 a.m. until people could actually finally have their voices heard. And so when we're in a system run by the GOP, when they're not even allowing Texans to speak up or speak out against this legislation, what other option did they leave you? They really left no other option. Y'all are doing your job. You're listening to your constituents who showed up. And this is what Texans wanted. This is what your Democratic constituents wanted. And I think that a lot of people, that's getting lost. People aren't understanding that y'all were asked to do this. This wasn't just a decision that you made lightly. You're risking getting arrested by being there right now. So I personally am super thankful for the decision that y'all made.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I also want to say I so appreciate everyone who has reached out with support, whether for me personally or to my staff, because our staffs are taking the brunt of the hate right now. So the immediate reaction to us leaving was joy. So many folks reached out to us excited. The first call I got when we landed in D.C. was from a constituent, early supporter of mine when I was in my primary in 2018, just telling me how proud she was of me and how proud she was of our courage. I think by taking this step, by taking the Republicans' ball away, we have inspired people all across the state of Texas. We have fought back using the biggest tool we have as a minority party. So I'm proud of that. And we did have some of that start to shift, but for that to shift, it took groups like the Associated Republicans of Texas to start carpet bombing people with text messages, begging them to call us to yell at us. The outpouring of support was earnest and genuine.
I'll tell you that, and that is so important because people really want to see that fight, right? They want to see the fight back on these things. And we realize that, yeah, Democrats are a minority in Texas, but that doesn't mean that Texas is entirely this extreme far right that wants these things, because there are independents and even some Republicans who are just sick of what they're seeing at the legislature. And that's why we've seen this state trend purple over the past few years. And, a lot of people forget the difference between the Democratic delegation and the Republican delegation in the legislature is a difference of only 8 seats, right? It was 8 seats would flip the legislature. It's a lot closer than people think. But the Republicans govern if they have like an 80 vote majority, which they don't.
They don't. And what is so wild about it to me is members who were in embattled defend districts on the Republican side, they campaigned this entire election cycle by basically pretending to be Democrats. My own opponent ran TV ads that made her look like a Democrat and then ran Facebook ads that made her look like a Trumper, which was the true version. And people, they're trying this bait and switch where they think that Texans don't have memories. They think Texans won't remember that in 2020, these people promised that they would work on expanding access to healthcare, which we did nothing on for the general public. We did a little bit for postpartum coverage, not as much as we were asking for, but we did a little. But folks campaigned on education funding. One of these people apologized for his role in the bathroom bill and now has taken a front seat in the trans bill fight. And I'm like, how are y'all going to have any credibility left with Texas voters? And I think they need to quit treating Texas voters like they aren't paying any attention. People are going to pay attention. Now that people believe Texas can be competitive, they are going to pay more attention and engage more. And there's going to be consequences for people lying to the voters.
Definitely. Now, obviously, we've witnessed over and over again Republicans flying out the window of reality, which is why Democrats decided to fly to D.C. and do some real work. Question, how was Lark handling her first work trip to D.C.?
Well, she's doing good. She is asking me to open some Play-Doh right now. And I actually have a constituent who just texted me that she's at the hotel and is going to come grab Lark and hang out with her. Actually, a local League of Women Voters volunteer just happens to have family staying in the same hotel we're in. So her and Lark are going to go hang out at the pool for a little bit. But she's really doing great. I don't want to say it's always easy for a kid to be in a hotel room in a big city, especially a country kid like my daughter. But she's really enjoying getting to see more people. I think the stay-at-home period was tough on her, and we've been pretty careful with her since she's too young to be vaccinated. But being in this group of the Democratic caucus where we are all vaccinated has been a good, safe spot for her. And she's enjoyed hanging out. One of her new favorites is actually Julie Johnson. Julie Johnson pulled her into her lap the other day, and Lark did something I've never seen her do. She just completely silently leaned against Julie and relaxed for a whole half an hour.
That's outstanding. One of the things that as you are all out there, I know that you're having lots of meetings, and one of the big pushes here is that what we are all seeing in Texas, it's not limited to Texas, right? Like, this is happening in state legislatures all over America, and it really is important to point out that, like, what you're standing up to by going to Washington is a national, like a national movement at the grassroots level, at the legislative level, for Republicans to try and just change these election laws. And I think it's so critical that we're trying to bring attention to it to get some federal support on this issue. Have your meetings been fruitful so far? You feel like they've been productive?
Yeah, I think our meetings have been very productive. I have personally been in meetings with Vice President Harris, with Senator Gillibrand, with Senator Warren, and they're all very supportive and also giving us very practical tips on how to reach some of the senators who are a little bit more nervous about the mechanisms they'll likely have to use to get some significant voter protection language passed. But some of my colleagues today are meeting with Joe Manchin. In fact, I think that meeting was going on a little bit before this. And we continue to reach out to folks and ask them for support. So what I'm hearing is the votes are there to pass the bill. The question is, are the votes there to relax the filibuster? And I think I think the courage we showed by picking up and leaving the state and being willing to give up being to be in our home state for the next 25 days is giving a lot of courage to some of the senators who are worried. I think some of the challenge we have right now is, I think there's a mood in the country that people want there to be less fighting. I think Trump exhausted people on public fighting. And so the challenge we're having with talking to federal leadership is that they want to try and meet this need for bipartisan, or this desire for bipartisanship from the public. But they're negotiating with people who don't have any investment in that. And so I think for them, it's like, how do they build the courage and the narrative enough to explain why, in this case, they need to make an exception to the filibuster? Why, in this case, it's important enough to move that mountain and protect the freedom to vote.
Wonderful. Have you heard, I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, any feedback from your constituents?
I've had a lot of feedback from constituents. It's a little bit hard to sort through what's constituents and what is not, because as I mentioned, we've had some Republican groups organizing mass texts of Democratic offices. And unfortunately, a lot of the calls that have resulted from that have been abusive and cruel. But most of what I'm hearing from my actual constituents is supportive. I do have folks. I'm in a swing district, so I have more folks that agree with me on this than don't, but there are some exceptions, and they're quite loud. So some of them I think are open to having a conversation, some are not. And one of the things on my schedule today is go through the people who have reached out that have questions and give them a call and talk to them about why we made this choice. And as folks hear that that there really was no negotiation space, when they hear about the 11th hour trick the Republicans pulled on us during the regular session, which really broke all trust at the last minute, they inserted 20 new pages of language that hadn't gone through either committee hearing.
Right.
We don't need to yell. That I think is persuasive. So, and we're actually doing a town hall tonight at 6 p.m. Central Time, where I'm going to talk directly to about 150 folks who've signed up to hear about what we're doing in DC and why we're here.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Zwiener. As a born and raised HD 45 Kyle, Texas girl, I thank you. The whole team at Progress Texas thanks you. The whole state, the country thanks you for what y'all are doing up there right now. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll let you get to all your other meetings that I'm sure you have to go to.
Thank you so much, Deanna and Ed and Wesley. It was great to see y'all.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Thanks.
Let's see. And now we are joined by Representative Jean Wu, again, live from DC. Representative, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to ask you a quick icebreaker question. You might not have an answer to it, no pressure. But we were talking about freedom earlier and national topics, related to freedom, specifically Britney Spears. Do you have a favorite Britney song?
Just put him on the spot, Diana.
Yeah, right.
It's been a few years since I've really listened to Britney songs. I guess we'd have to go back to the oldies. Is a Baby Hit Me One More Time. I mean, how can you not? I mean, that's talk about an earworm. I mean, that's been. No, I hesitate to even say it just because then you're wriggling have it in my head for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And I think I just aged myself too. So
no, that's all right. I said the same thing. So you're good.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
For me.
Sorry, I think you were breaking up a little bit.
No, I'm sorry. This is a new platform for me. So can you guys see and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you're looking good and coming across great. One of the things we wanted to ask you, since you're coming to us live from DC, is that obviously the second quorum break is the big news of the day. And you've probably had a lot of good meetings out there so far. And I'm curious how they're going. Have you feel like they've been productive? Because, the thing is, and we talked about this with Representative Zwiener a moment ago, what we're seeing is in Texas is not limited to Texas. Like, you really have a nationwide issue on your shoulders right now that you're bringing to Congress. And I don't know that a lot of people quite understand that.
So let's just start with that. This is sort of the point. This is sort of the point of why the Republicans have been doing this and doing it in this way. So this is not legislation that's brand new in Texas. This has been filed. This is the same stuff that's been filed in every red state in this entire nation. And Georgia, Virginia, or West Virginia, Alabama, Florida, all these states have already passed this legislation. And the point of this legislation is to be innocuous. The point of it is that on individual items, it seems okay. It doesn't say there's a poll tax. It doesn't say that Black people can't vote. But if you take all of the stuff in totality, it adds up a lot. And the way I would describe it is look, if somebody slaps you in the face one time, it's going to hurt, but it probably won't seriously injure you. But if somebody slaps you in the face 100 times, you might end up in the hospital. And this is the point. Is that they're trying to pass stuff that looks boring. It looks innocuous. So everybody goes, oh, I don't know what it is. Who cares? The point of us leaving and breaking quorum and coming to DC is to say, 5-alarm fire. They're trying to do this stuff and they're lying about what they're doing. Mm-hmm. It's not innocuous. If this was a big nothing burger, if this was no big deal, the governor of the state of Texas would not be ready to collapse the government of the entire state over nothing. Democrats would not be sacrificing our families, our jobs, our incomes, our mortgages for nothing. And that's the whole point, that there is a national campaign by Republicans to do these very quietly, very carefully, to do all these things that look like nothing on the outside. But in the end, it'll put up enough of a barrier so that poor people, minorities, immigrants, the disabled, the elderly, college students, it's just high enough. The barrier is just high enough where most people can get over. But if you can stop an extra 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 voters, they might be able to stay in power just a little bit longer.
And let's talk about some of those changes. Like one of the things I've noticed is that they refer to the practice, like if you have a loved one who is sick and fills out an absentee ballot and you submit that absentee ballot in the mail for them or in a drop box, they refer to that as ballot harvesting, which is not ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting is when someone goes around and picks up 200 to 300 ballots and dumps them somewhere and picks out the ones they like, right? Which is something they did in North Carolina. Republicans did it in North Carolina and had to have an election done over again. But they're now using terms that they are guilty of and trying to relabel other things to make them not only to make them look nefarious, but to try and slow down the vote. In addition to one of the things, I know the big argument was over Sunday polling hours, saying that they could vote at 1 o'clock and not 11 o'clock, making it harder for people to go straight from church to a polling place. That's right. Slowing down the Souls to the Polls campaigns on Sundays, specifically targeting Black churches and their mobilization efforts. These are all the kind of like little things that when you look at it at the surface, you see a lot of national reporters say, it's not that bad, you can get around it. Well, I mean, it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? Or as you said, punch in the face once versus 100 times, right?
Yeah, death by 1,000 cuts is the analogy I've been using for a lot of these interviews. No, that's exactly on point. That's exactly on point. And look, even the Souls to the Polls amendment, that they, after being caught red-handed with that addition, they say, oh, we don't know how it got there. That was totally unintended. It was a typo. So you mistyped not only the time, but also AM, PM, right? And
then mistakenly defended it on the floor of the Senate.
Yeah.
They said the same thing about the provision on overturning elections too. And it's like, that was a whole provision in there. That wasn't a mistake.
And here's what I want y'all and everybody who's paying attention to be really careful of. What's in HB 3 right now, I guarantee you will not be what's finally in the bill. This is what they've done on bill after bill after bill. That when the Senate bill comes over, it looks okay. When the House bill goes over, it looks okay. But when conference committee comes back, what do? They added 23 new provisions that no one has seen, that the bill authors, well, at least pretended that they didn't know were there, right? And so this is the danger. This is the danger of, this is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to go to press, they're trying to go to the public and say, oh, it's no big deal. Look at these things. They're harmless, right? Which we know even the things they say are harmless are not harmless. But what they're going to do is at the end of the day, right before the final passage of this bill, they're going to shove everything in there. And then it's too late. And so, I mean, the thing I want to remind people, if you're listening to this, I want you to have this in mind. The Republicans are not freaking stupid. They're not stupid. There's too much money. There's too much power at stake on this bill. This is their future. I've said from the very beginning of the session, this is the Republicans' most important bill. This is their absolute must pass or die bill because they see the changing demographics. They know that because their embrace of Trump, no one is coming into the party. There are no new people coming into a party that is openly anti-immigrant, racist, and just anti-LGBT, and just anti-future and anti-America. No one is coming into this party anymore. And their remaining people are Proud Boys, right? And they know that that is their future for the next foreseeable future. And they know now that the only way they can get through this is if they keep Black and brown people, young people, disabled people, immigrants from voting. And it doesn't need to be, and I have to emphasize this, it doesn't have to be, they put a big old sticker on there that says, Black people not allowed, which is what they used to do. But they figured out, oh, you get into a little bit of trouble with the courts when you do that. And what they're doing is, with a state with 11 million voters in 2020, They don't have to keep all the Democrats from voting, right? If they can just take a 0.1% will be blocked from voting. That's enough of a margin of victory in a lot of these races. 2020, you saw people winning races by 100 votes in districts where there were 20,000 votes cast.
Yeah.
And they know this, and they're not stupid. They have calculated down to the individual prohibition. If you can get this passed, it will be an extra 50,000 voters across the state. If you can get this passed, it's an extra 100,000, and they've tallied those numbers. They know exactly which items and which provisions are they must pass, and they must put these in here.
Representative Wu, you are completely correct. And as you've explained to us, the stakes are too high. And honestly, Texas Democrats seem to have been left with no choice but to fly to D.C. to continue working hard to defend our right to vote. Now, would you mind letting our audience know a little bit more about what kind of work you and other Texas Democrats have been doing in D.C. so far?
Yeah, and so I know this was part of a question that was asked earlier, and we didn't get to do it, but because I talk too much.
You're doing great.
Some of our Republican colleagues are laughing at us and saying like, what are you guys going to do up there? You can go drink your Miller Lite. Look, man, I'm not going to say we can take credit for it, but President Biden changed his speech, right? On Tuesday, when President Biden gave his speech in Pennsylvania, it was originally not supposed to be about civil rights.
Wow.
Right? We had an hour-and-a-half meeting with Vice President Harris, where she reassured us and thanked us for bringing attention to not to a Texas issue, but to a national issue. Every single red state in this nation is going through this right now. And for the first time, people around the nation are paying attention and caring about what's going on. And that's a big deal. That's a big change. Look, if that's all we accomplish in our time in Washington, D.C., and we got this in front of the White House, we got this in front, we went in front of the Senate and talked about this. We talked to senators. We've been talking to senators every single day. We met with Joe Manchin today. Right? That is no small feat.
Yeah.
And if we can just move the needle a tiny bit, if we can change the discourse, and some of our conversations from yesterday about talking to senators who already support us, what they came back with was the senators were grateful for us to come and explain to them exactly what the Republicans are trying to do. Because at a federal level, they don't necessarily understand how nefarious this legislation is and how, because they see what the press says and they looked at it and stuff and said, 24-hour voting, drive-through voting, I don't understand. And we say, like, it's not just that.
Yeah. It's
also about how you do the ballots. It's also about having the insurgent MAGA troopers standing behind you at a polling location, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's about your little grandma not being able to ask whoever she wants to assist her at the polling location. And that person has to fill out an affidavit. It's about but poor people not even being able to share a vehicle to get to the polls. About not being able for young people to take an Uber or a Lyft to the polls. I mean, stuff that they keep saying, this is about election integrity. And that's what even our supporters in the Senate, U.S. Senate hear. But they don't.
You brought up two important things that I want to provide some more context to for anybody who may not be aware of it. But like when Representative Wu talks about MAGA troopers standing behind you in the polling place, like that is a legit thing that these bills try to do. They're trying to empower partisan poll watchers to be able to interfere with the balloting process. And if they do something that's not right or that's illegal, they're only allowed to be given a warning. In other words, they can keep doing it. And in some instances, like, that the only reason that they're there in most instances is to try and change the outcome of the election, not necessarily to watch it. And then the other thing you mentioned about getting a ride from one of your friends or taking an Uber to a polling place, I know that 2 years ago, they tried to say that any driver would have to sign an affidavit to take somebody to a polling place. I don't know if that's still the case or if it's actually farther than that. And if somebody doesn't sign an affidavit, then suddenly they're like subject to some sort of penalty.
Yep.
I don't know how bad it is, but like, why? What if we're changing voting laws? Why not make it easier to vote? Why not? If you're going to standardize the hours, great. Why not standardize them to be a little longer instead of be shorter?
So I think so. This is, I mean, obviously, this is the frustration, right? Once you actually understand what's in here, you start to raise your eyebrows, like, really? That's in there?
Yeah.
One of the things that's repeated in the bill is felony level criminal penalties for the most innocuous things, right? For missing a signature, for not filling out an affidavit, for the most minor of things, there are criminal penalties strewn throughout. There's only one reason for that. On things that have nothing to do with election integrity, and that has no possible effect on election integrity, it's to make sure that as many poor people know that you could risk going to jail if you vote or if you help someone vote, right? And this ultimately, at the end of the day, is a poll tax. You may make someone pay a poll tax of X amount of dollars in past, and then the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. But what if you take that poll tax and you chop it up into 100 little pieces, and you kind of just like scatter it out there? And while most people would say, well, I'm just going to, if I pick a big deal, but for current community, if they pick up a few pieces and then a few more pieces and then a few more pieces, that becomes a significant tax on their ability to do things. Essentially, what all these requirements are saying, if you don't have the resources to bring yourself to the polls at a time that is convenient for the state, and if you have to work, you have kids, you better have money to pay for someone to take your spot. Or you better have money to someone to have someone to babysit. You better have money to ride in a car by yourself. You better have money to do all these different things. And if you don't, you might go to jail. That's the point.
You know, something you mentioned a minute ago is that at the federal level, they don't necessarily understand just how bad things are. I think what the Texas Dems who are in DC right now are really, the value that you're providing is you're calling out the immediacy. Like, we need action right now. We can't wait any longer. Things in Congress tend to move slow. There can be legislation that takes decades to get passed. We don't have decades. If something doesn't happen now, if we don't pass the For the People Act, if we don't pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we might not have a democracy in a year from now. And so I think that that is one of the most valuable parts of what y'all are doing in DC is you're highlighting the immediacy. Yeah. This is the second time that Texas Dems are up there. We already had another walkout. Abbott's threatening to call another special session. And so we're just continuing to tell them that time is of the essence. And a month from now, they're going to be able to get this legislation passed because things in Texas move faster. We're the minority. Democrats are the minority here. And if they really want to get it done, if Republicans want to get this legislation passed, they can do it eventually. So we need for Democrats to step up.
So there needs to be federal protection at the very, very least. And this is one of the things I think our group talked to Joe Manchin about. Is, look, at the very least, we need to reinstate the VRA. We need to reinstate pre-clearance. And it doesn't matter. Like, you know what? There's gerrymandering. There's shenanigans that happens in Democratic controlled states too, right? Those are no more right than what they're trying to do in Texas. So you know what? Let's put everybody under pre-clearance. Let's put everybody under the threat of being sued by the DOJ. That's fine with us. Let's at least get that portion through, right? And we'll worry about other stuff once we have a bigger majority in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, baby steps. I want to ask you about a couple other things. Diana, what was something you mentioned about? I think you mentioned something about the fugitive meals.
Yes, I had a very important question. Another one of my super important questions. Representative Wu you have been posting a lot on Twitter about what you have labeled as your fugitive meals. Can you tell us what has been your favorite fugitive meals and why do you call them that?
I actually only posted the fugitive thing one time. We were in the Capitol cafeteria taking a break before our next meetings, and it was 10 o'clock, and we got news that we were officially fugitives in the state of Texas. And so I tweeted out that, hey, this is my first meal as a fugitive. It tastes pretty good. And so since that, the right, the Fox News audiences of the world, like, completely lost their shit. And some of it is, and you know what? And you know what? I could not be happier. So if my $7 chicken Caesar salad drives them absolutely insane, and that is a good $7 spent, I could not be happier about that outcome. And that really shows you exactly where they are in this conversation, that they're so desperate to talk about anything other than violating the civil rights of Americans, that they want to talk about salads. They want to talk about a 12-pack of Miller Lite, right? They want to talk about, oh, you're in a chartered bus. So you guys support public transportation now? What is, so, it's like one of those things that I'm pleased as a peach that's what they're mad about, that they spent 4 different Fox News segments talking about my salad. I even had a personal protester. They had a protester out here protesting me eating salad.
Like a sign?
Yeah, with a sign. I mean, look at my feed. So I mean, that's their complaint is, Democrats eat salads. Woo, Democrats eat salads.
Right? You didn't even mention it, but I think my favorite part of that tweet was actually when you said, "Now I know what it's like to be Ken Paxton all the time."
Yes!
You have to go see for yourself. No, look, and so I sent out other tweets following that, saying, "Oh, so since my tweet about my salad went viral, let me give you some more material." So every day I've been trying to post like what I've been eating for breakfast or lunch, and I am concerned that Fox News may not have enough materials. I'm concerned about the revenue because with the Dominion $1.6 billion lawsuit, they're going to need every penny. And I don't want to see all those people put out of business because we wouldn't know how to mock Republicans without Fox News.
It's true. It's kind of like a playbook. And I'll tell you, there's one other good thing, and we'll finish on this. There's one other good thing about breaking quorum and going to Washington, D.C. is that you have given Republicans this gift in that they now have more time than they realized to focus on fixing the grid. Because as we know, they just keep forgetting to put it on the agenda in the legislative sessions. And now with summer upon us, they've got nothing but time to focus on the things that voters really want them to focus on.
Look, and this is just going to be a secret between us. The Republicans are not interested in fixing the grid.
What?
Oh my God.
What?
Oh my God.
And here's the three big reasons why: money, money, and money.
What was the middle one?
Money.
Got it.
Fixing the grid would require a complete revamp of the way we sell electricity. There is a very powerful vested interest in our market, keeping it the way it is, keeping it insane. There was a big windfall for the natural gas generators. There's a big windfall for a lot of the power generators in this, right? When you charge $9,000 per megawatt hour, that's cha-ching, right? Somebody won, and the only thing I know, I'm not sure who, but I know Texans lost. Mm-hmm. It would require actual weatherization. Guess what? That's serious money. Yeah. And it would require us to put in additional reserve generation power. And you're right, we have a market where, hey, if there's increased supply, what happens to the price? It goes down, right? Why would they voluntarily put in more supply and decrease what they can charge for electricity?
And in the meantime, they can distract by trying to make it illegal for an Uber driver to take people to the polls.
So it's not just the Republicans. And I've said this on tweets before. There is a vested, powerful corporate interest in keeping Republicans in power, right? And that interest comes at your cost. That interest comes at the cost of Texans. That means we pay more for electricity. That means we have more brownouts. That means our healthcare is more expensive. That means we have a worse education system. That means we have X, Y, Z, go down the list. Anything from minimum wage to paternal leave, to just go down the list. Anything that makes it more expensive for corporations. That's how the politics lines up. And when somebody one day on the Republican side of working class Republicans, one day they're going to wake up and realize they've been distracted by this war about abortion and Caesar salads. And they're going to say, oh, crap, we've been screwing ourselves all this time.
I feel like we could do a whole other show on that one, too.
Abortions and Caesar salads.
I'm here.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Wu, for joining us. I know you and the other Texas Democrats are so hard at work out there and that you have so many more meetings. So I'll let you get back to those meetings and to those delicious Caesar salads. Thank you again for joining us and sharing a bit of your time with our viewers.
All right. Thank you. All salads matter.
Yes.
All right. Well, that was something. It looks like these guys are making some good progress out in D.C. and that they're getting the attention of a lot of elected officials, especially those in the U.S. Senate.
I'm excited to see just how much support they're also getting from constituents here in Texas. That was good to hear from Representative Zwiener.
Yeah, you know, the one thing I liked, sorry, Dana, the one thing I liked was when the plane took off, the crowd of people with signs that said thank you, and it said like go fight win, and I can't remember what the signs were, but I know that there was like a crowd of people cheering them on, and you know that I think gets overlooked sometimes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to remind folks that there was that crowd of folks cheering them on, and just to continue to remind our viewers to show their gratitude for their representatives out in DC. And even if your current representative isn't out there, unfortunately, all of them need our support. All of them need your calls to their offices here in Texas, letting them know to stay out there, to stay fighting for us, and just to keep cheering them on.
All right.
All righty then. Well, thank you so much, Wesley, Ed. Another shout out and thank you to Representative Wu and Representative Zwiener for all of y'all lending your expertise. To everyone who was watching and listening, thanks for joining us as well. Head over to progresstexas.org to follow us on social and subscribe to our email list. If you're listening to us, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. All right. Bye, everyone.
See y'all.